The Fourth Way by P.D. Ouspensky. Chapter 14. Question. Isn't one often afraid of things that one knows nothing about? Answer. Fear is simply a certain state. It can be without any object. This shows how useless negative emotions are. We often invent objects for an emotion when the emotion is already there. Take envy, fear, suspicion. We think emotion is produced in us by something outside, when in reality it is in us. We only look for an object afterwards, and in this way we justify it. Question. I still cannot understand why all causes of negative emotion are in myself. Answer. If you observe yourself, you will see causes outside remain the same. But sometimes they produce negative emotion in you, and sometimes not. Why? Because real causes are in you. They are only apparent, because real causes are in you. They are only apparent causes outside. If you are in a good state, if you are remembering yourself, if you are not identifying, then nothing happens outside, relatively speaking, for I do not mean catastrophes, can produce a negative emotion in you. Okay, let me read that sentence again. If you are in a good state, if you are remembering yourself, if you are not identifying, then nothing happens outside, in brackets, he says, relatively speaking, for I do not mean catastrophes, close bracket, can produce a negative emotion in you. If you are in a bad state, identified, immersed in imagination, then everything, just a little unpleasant, will produce a violent emotion. It's a question of observation. Question. But I still do not see how some things, for instance, people's behavior, could fail to produce negative emotion. Answer. They are machines. Why should the behavior of machines produce negative emotion? If a machine hits you, it is your own fault. You must not be in the way of the machine. You may have a negative emotion, but it's not the fault of the machine, it's your own fault. Other people do not have as much power over you as you think. It is only the result of identification. You can be much more free if you do not identify. And sometimes you are more free. That's why I say it must be observed. If you observe well, you will see that sometimes you identify more and sometimes less. And because of this, sometimes you are absolutely in the power of negative emotions, and sometimes you have a certain resistance. It may take a long time to learn how to resist negative emotions, but it is not impossible. You must understand one thing about negative emotions. We are too afraid of them. We consider them too powerful. We can show resistance to them if we persist and do not consider them inevitable and omnipotent. Question. I could see myself losing my temper the other day when I was talking to somebody, but I could not stop it. How can I control temper? Answer. This is an example of mechanicalness. You cannot control your temper when it has already begun to appear. It is then too late. Struggle must begin in your mind. You must find a way to think rightly about definite difficulty. You must find your way to think rightly about a definite difficulty. Suppose you have to meet a certain man who irritates you. Your temper shows itself. You do not like it. How can you stop it? You must begin with a study of your own thinking. What do you think about this man? Not what you feel when you're irritated, but what do you think about him at quiet moments? You may find that in your mind you argue with him. You prove to him that he is wrong. You tell him all his mistakes. You find that generally he behaves wrongly towards you. This is where you are wrong. You must learn to think rightly. Then, if you do, it will happen like this through emotion. No. Then, if you do, it will happen like this, although emotion is much quicker than thought. Emotion is a temporary thing, but thought can be made continuous. So, whenever the emotion jumps out, it hits you. It hits against this continuous thought, and it cannot go on and manifest itself. So, you can struggle with the expression of negative emotions, as in this example, only by creating continuous right thinking. To explain what right thinking is in a few words is impossible. It's necessary to study it. If you remember what I said about parts of centers, you will come to that, because in most cases, and most conditions in ordinary life, people think only with the mechanical part of the intellectual center, which is the formatory apparatus. This is not sufficient. It is necessary to use the intellectual part of the intellectual center. Identifying is the chief reason why we do not use it. Excuse me. Trying to self-remember and trying to not identify is the best means of passing into higher parts of centers. But we always forget about identification and about self-remembering. Question: can conquering negative emotions like fear create energy? Answer: very much so. This is the best means of collecting energy. All possibilities of development are contained in conquering negative emotions and transforming them. A man with negative emotions will never do anything. Question: into what kinds of things can negative emotions be transformed? Answer: it's better to say that they must be conquered. But if you like, we can say that they are transformed into some kind of emotion mixed very much with understanding, an emotion of higher parts of centers. Almost any negative emotion that we have can be transformed into an emotion of higher parts of centers. But this needs understanding, conviction that it is necessary, and decision to do it. Question: is it negative emotions that prevent us from getting into those emotional states? Answer: yes. We have enough money, but we spend it all on unpleasant things. If we save enough, we can use it in the right way. Power to use comes with quantity. Question: I observe two kinds of indignation in myself. One, when, for example, I see a child hurt, and another, when something annoys me myself. Are they both equally negative? Answer: the more unselfish the indignation is, and the more right you are, the worse it is. The more energy you lose in it, the more negative results it will produce. Let me read that again, because that seems important. Answer: the more unselfish the indignation is, and the more right you are, the worse it is. The more energy you lose in it, the more negative results it will produce. Question: why am I so much sooner roused into negative emotion during discussions than at any other time? Political discussions, for instance. Answer: because you always think that things can be different. When you realize and become firmly convinced that things could not be different, you cease to argue. Arguing is based on the idea that things could be different, and that some people could do things differently. Try to think from the point of view that all that happens because it cannot be different. If it could be different, it would have happened differently. It's very simple, but very difficult to realize. Question: if we see something that we do not like in others, Is it because we are mirrors for ourselves? They are mirrors for ourselves, and we have the same thing in us? Answer: chiefly yes, but it is a great thing to realize that. Maybe people dislike others because they are mirrors of themselves. They do not realize it, but somehow they feel it vaguely, and it makes them dislike them. However, there is also a principle in the work that before becoming better, one has to become worse. It's not only because one notices more, one actually does become worse before one acquires more control. Question: if one always remembered about people that they could not act in any other way, could one then understand them? Answer: naturally, you must remember that, and until this remembering is constant, you can understand nothing about them. There are many things like that. All you learn in the system must be in your consciousness at the same time, otherwise very small things will make you forget everything. Question: I find I become very negative when given advice and never agree with it. Answer: again, it's all based on your attitude. You must admit that someone else can affect your emotional state. We should not admit an emotional power like that over us. Now, even if you merely think about the advice, you feel annoyed. You can reconstruct it, but you should think about it in quite a different way. It is purely a matter of reasoning. Even if people give you advice without thinking, even if you know better, there is no reason for you to lose your temper. You cannot get anything by being annoyed or irritated. You must stop justifying it in your mind. When one stops this justifying, one very often finds the cause of these negative emotions is some wrong idea. Everybody can find something wrong in one or another side of life, and generally one tends to put the responsibility on this thing. One thinks that if this thing were right, everything else would be right. Everybody has one, sometimes two or more combinations of circumstances which one blames for everything wrong that one does and for all one's manifestations and weaknesses. But one must understand that absolutely anything in the world can produce this result. Suppose there is some definite thing that is wrong, and I think, if it were right, I would be different. But if it were right, I would be just the same. I speak from experience because I know people who thought so, and when the particular thing they found wrong was changed, they remained the same and merely found another unpleasant thing instead of that first one. Question: I find that one of my greatest difficulties is irritation. Answer: this is one of the deepest features in people, and it affects the whole mass. The most difficult thing in the world is to bear patiently the unpleasant manifestations of other people. People can sacrifice everything else, but they cannot stand that. Irritation is a particular emotion produced by the feeling of mechanicalness of oneself or other people. It does not mean that every mechanical thing causes irritation, but sometimes mechanicalness produces it. If we do not feel the mechanicalness of other people, in some particular instance, they may be even more mechanical, but there is no irritation. We are irritated by other people acting as machines because we are machines ourselves. If we cease to be machines, we shall cease to be irritated. This feeling of mechanicalness becomes irritation because we identify with it. If we manage to remove identification, the same thing that we know now as irritation becomes a very useful emotion, a kind of tentacle by which we can feel mechanicalness. You cannot imagine how different quite ordinary emotion becomes, and often how useful, if we do not identify with it. Question. How can one best deal with negative emotion when it becomes simply apathy? Answer. Very often when negative emotion takes the form of passive resistance, you can do nothing at the moment, but you can continue to work. If you can do nothing today, there will be tomorrow and the day after and next week and next month. You must prepare for the future, first of all, by self-remembering, by remembering why you came, by remembering the first principles. All this apathy and negative feelings come from sleep. If you continue to sleep when you should try to awake, this sleep will produce one or another negative state.